Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of QTube. What we're doing today is we have three different artists, four if you count the numbers, from different areas of country music who are all part of the LGBT community. And we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about music, their experiences, how long they've been in the industry and that kind of thing. But before we get into that too far, I'd like to introduce our guests. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. We have Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, Tommy Atkins, and Chris Hausman. So I'm going to pass it to Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, and welcome to QTube.
Thank you. Should we do the stage introduction?
Yeah, sure.
All right, ready? Hey, we're Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn. You're supposed to do it with me.
Oh, that? Oh, I know. I thought you were going to do the I'm Courtney, Lynn.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm Courtney, Lynn.
And I'm Quinn.
We sing Americana music. We're from Charlotte, North Carolina, or just south of there. And we've been playing music together for 4 years. Almost 4 years.
But also, most important, this is my beautiful wife. So, yeah, that's an exciting thing for me. I get to do this with my spouse every day, so it's a good time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And congratulations, because I do believe it wasn't that long ago.
It was fall of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So not too long ago.
But this is our first time meeting, so this is my first time getting to face-to-face say congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, next we're going to move across the sea a bit, and we're going to go to the UK and Mr. Tommy Atkins.
Hello, yes, my name's Tommy. I'm from Newcastle in the UK, up towards Scotland. I've been writing country music for about 10 years now. I was pursuing a career as a songwriter, but over the last couple of years, I've decided to kind of go the artist route, and I've been releasing music for a year now. Been lucky enough to have a couple of top fives here in the UK and over in New Zealand, and yeah, just loving life as a country music artist at the moment.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have from Nashville, Tennessee, because you got to have somebody from Nashville when we're talking about the music. We have Chris Hausman. Hello, Chris.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for putting this together. This is awesome. And I feel like Tommy should do like a lot more talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm Chris Hausman, originally from a tiny town in western Kansas, about 200 people. So hence the country upbringing, and grew up on a farm there, did music with like a family bluegrass, country and gospel band, and then moved to Nashville as soon as I graduated high school. I went to college here and have just kind of stuck around, and yeah, just really started. I've done a lot of writing and stuff and kind of stayed behind the scenes for a number of years, a lot because of my queerness and not being comfortable with actively pursuing country in that. But then in the last like year or so have kind of gotten rid of that and pursuing a solo artist career. Yeah, put out 2 songs in the last year and can't wait to do more. So
awesome. And it's interesting, Chris, that you said, I mean, I think we have 3 different perspectives here too, where Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn have, they are now married and they've been doing this together. Tommy, I'm not sure, but I think that you said you've been doing this for the last 10 years, and I think that you've kind of had your opportunity to become a little bit more settled with that in the industry type thing. And then Chris, you're kind of relatively new to it in terms of embracing it from your, the standpoint of, as we like to call, true authenticity. But, being your real you and being able to kind of get into that. So it's very different perspectives. Before getting too deep into it, Chris, who was it, that kind of got you into country music? What was, and I think you said that you grew up listening to country music, but who were the influencers, I guess, in country that kind of turned you on and said, I need to pick up that guitar. I need to be in there. I need to be playing this kind of music.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that was like all I grew up, 90s country. In 90s, I mean, pop stuff. I remember watching VH1 and MTV a lot too, but like on the radio all the time, we were listening to the Dixie Chicks and Shania Twain back when they played women on country radio. But and Alan Jackson was I think my first CD I bought was one of his first greatest hits CD. Loved George Strait, Vince Gill, like all those, just so much great stuff in the 90s. But even also then I was doing all these like cowboy shows, and we were doing like Hank Williams Sr. songs and like Little Jimmy Dickens. So a lot of that older like classic country stuff too. So that like 100% influenced so much of like my music identity. So that's for me at least. But.
And Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, kind of hanging off of what Chris just said there, because he did bring up a valid point about like, playing women on country music radio stations. Who was it that, who did you follow? And just to add to that, based off of what Chris just said, who are you hearing or not hearing on the radio now that you feel it should be out there?
Well,
other than yourselves, of course, other than yourself.
Well, I don't know, but we have a little bit of a different background, so I'll let Courtney go answer too. But I'm from Wilmington, North Carolina, so I'm from the Carolinas. I grew up like passionately listening to country music, 90s country, sort of like what Chris said, Dixie Chicks, Shania Twain, George Strait, Tim McGraw, Faith Hill, all those people, Martina McBride, and my favorite of all time when I was little was Winona Judd, and I literally dressed up like Winona Judd for Halloween 3 years in a row. So like I just loved country music my whole life, and my mom actually was a singer for most of my childhood, and I kind of like wanted to sing. She never really did anything professional, but she inspired me to want to do it because I just loved watching her in little local bands, and so I just always was in entertainment, and I grew up a dancer too. So for me, the musical experience was just a part of that journey. And then I think when Courtney and I met and started doing music together, she sort of had more of like this folky sound, and I had like this like soulful Southern rock country thing going on, and we sort of like tried to mesh them together, which is sort of, I think, a lot of where our sound kind of combines. So that's sort of my perspective on it. And as far as the other question, yes, I agree. Women in music, in country music especially, it's like, I remember when I was growing up, it was like Martina McBride and Sarah Evans and Faith Hill and Dixie Chicks and all these like powerful women country artists, Reba and the Judds and all this stuff. And now I feel like every time I hear a new artist, it's like another dude. No offense, but like, like I love them still, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like there's sort of this lack of strong women country vocalists being shown on the radio. Now I feel like there's a lot of, they're still out there.
Yeah, it's not possible that it comes down to a lack of talent. So
it's like a poppy, it's like a more sweeter, poppier thing that I see going on with women these days. So I'm missing those power ballad female country artists. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Long-winded.
Yeah, Quinn's long-winded. She can't help herself.
I apologize.
I come from, I grew up in Greenfield, Indiana, so like a really small Midwestern town, and now we live in the Carolinas. So country music and just that, the messages that are in country music, I think we relate to. And I always loved it. And so when I started writing and playing music, that's just naturally what came out, like, folk, Americana country style music. I do miss the representation. While I see some of it coming up, like Brandy Carlisle is a huge influence for us. She's a very strong queer woman in Americana music. And so we have some beacons of hope, but I think, especially for women, it can be harder to find good inspiration. So,
yeah.
Awesome. And Mr. Atkins, how does someone from the UK close to Scotland in Newcastle get into country music? Where did that come from?
It's so funny listening to Chris and Courtney, Lynn and Quinn, because my influences are exactly the same. I heard Shania Twain was massive here in the 90s. I remember listening to Shania. My dad used to have Alan Jackson on a cassette tape in the car. And like my great grandmother used to listen to Tammy Wynette. So when I was really young, I would hear like kind of classic country. But it was that 90s country I really fell in love with. And I remember when Carrie Underwood was on American Idol, I think I was maybe 12 or 13. And it just kind of brought that music background for me. And I was just obsessed with country from there on in. I think I was kind of like part of that generation where Napster was legal for a little while. So you could, and just look at all of the like associated artists. And it just became like an obsession. I was just obsessed with hearing as much country music as I could. But that 90s country really has always stuck with me. And I like to think still comes out in my music now as well.
Tommy, is the country scene, I guess, big in the UK? Is it burgeoning? Is it small? You know, how much opportunity, I guess, not only as a country artist, but a country and queer artist get to actually play?
Yeah, I think my timing has been pretty good as an artist because over the last 10 years, we've seen a really big growth in country. So the Country to Country Festival started back over here in, I think, 2012, when the major label artists like Carrie Underwood and Tim McGraw were all coming over here to start touring. And that was kind of the start of the boom over here. And maybe since kind of 2015, 2016, there's been kind of this emergence of UK artists and UK country becoming a little genre of its own. So now we have, I would say, probably a dozen country music festivals around the UK every year. Obviously not this year, but usually we have a dozen or so country music festivals, and we have really big country radio stations as well. Definitely not as many as the US and Canada or Australia, but it really is becoming quite a big scene. And some of the biggest radio stations like the BBC now have country shows and play country artists on their main playlists. So it's definitely a great time for country music in general, but as far as being a queer country artist, I didn't really have an example of that over here in the UK at all. So I've kind of been one of the first ones to come out with just being openly LGBTQ+. And this year, one of my songs, which features an openly gay lyric, thankfully got picked up at major country radio. And as far as we know, that was the first time in the UK that's happened. So there really isn't too much going on from a queer country perspective over here at the moment.
And, you know, I think kind of, you know, on the back end of that too, what you're saying is like, it's one thing to be an artist and be out yourself. It's another thing when you start peppering in same-sex pronouns, that people are listening to, you know, in one, you know, Chattahoochee at one thing, followed by, you know, the male version of He Stopped Loving Her Today. I don't know. But, you know, when you think about that, it's so interesting to me that, you know, it makes sense that you are not the only three. And I mean, I've been trying to collect names in country music. And I know, Tommy, you and I have chatted a bit about this because you have your playlist, and I've sent you folks to add to it. Because that representation hasn't been there. It has been existing. There's been country lovers, but they haven't felt, I guess, the ability to come out or put themselves forward, which is a great, you know, lead into Mr. Hausman, who is in the heart of the male country artist. You know, country, I said this about rap too, is almost like football. It's like the football of music, kind of, in a way, where it's like, well, there can't be any men in there who would be gay. Like, they just don't, you know, they don't play football. And it's like, no, they do. It's just that they don't say that they happen to be, you know, LGBT. So Chris, as you know, that guy who's probably grown up, and, you know, you're experiencing the Deuteronomy maybe of, you know, the country world, and as you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about it, how has that, you know, been for you in terms of your progression into it? What was that like for you?
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I actually did grow up playing football in high school and stuff, and it was like all state in football. so I feel like I've been able to kind of have both of those like perspectives of like the small town and like what you're supposed to do as a person in country. But then I was like, wait, I don't fit in with that totally. So, and yet like the progression into that, I mean, like I touched on earlier, like it's just, it was a really terrifying thing. And took me just a lot of years and just kind of, I mean, giving less fucks. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. Sorry.
You can absolutely give as many less fucks as you want to right now.
Perfect. I don't really know another way to say that better than that. But yeah, I mean, it's been like a scary thing, and it still is scary, but it was pretty much like Tommy was saying, with when you don't have any like representation of that. There was so many, like there were years that I was like, well, I wouldn't want to like shoot myself in the foot and ruin a career before I even got anything started. But then at the same time, I was in Nashville, and to everyone here, I was openly gay. And I mean, just the whole time I've been with all my college friends and family. But so I just kind of like, did songwriting and did shows every once in a while. But I literally was like, oh, I don't really have much interest maybe in like pursuing artistry, you know, like putting myself out there to that level. But then like, and it's crazy though, because in Nashville, there's actually a ton of the music industry, even country music, that are gay people or bi people or in the LGBT community. They're just the ones working, and they're behind the scenes, or they're you know, completely in the closet, which I totally understand that too, if that, you know. But so the more I saw, like, oh yeah, the industry itself is actually pretty accepting in Nashville. Like, it really is. And Nashville is a little liberal city in a red sea of the South. But so when I saw that, like, okay, the people here, like, they'll eventually catch up, and maybe it'll take the listeners, and it'll take radio will probably be the last to embrace it, but it's going to happen eventually. And it'd be cool to be like, I kind of see this opportunity to be kind of on the forefront, like we're all kind of doing right now, you know. But and especially my focus being with like commercial country stuff that you would hear on the radio, even if it's not getting put on the radio.
It's funny that you mentioned radio, because to be honest, you don't have to mention anyone's sexuality on the radio. You just have to play good music and be willing to play good music. So it's kind of interesting that radio has this push and pull, and I don't know what happens in the behind the scenes. I always like get up on my high horse and say, you know, just choose good songs, just listen to the good music, and if it's good music, just play it. But I know there's politics. Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, now you both made music on your own before kind of coming together. So you probably had, you know, your own experiences with your sexuality and within the music industry. And then I say this with all hope that as together you feel stronger for it, and that you can kind of, you know, weather the storm a little bit more when things kind of come up, because you are, you know, partners, you are married. There is no denying, there's no hiding things. A fantastic thing that happened this year was the recognition of Brandy Carlisle, who I have all the time in the world for. And I think she's an incredible, incredible artist. But even herself, in a lot of her interviews and even in her speeches when she's been winning awards, she's kind of made mention of the fact that here she was for so long trying to break through, and just walls. But finally it happened. But yeah, from your perspective, like, how was that, I guess, the differences as solo artists and now being together and being, you know, a married couple?
It's kind of funny because I've been writing music since I was 15. I love writing. I love playing guitar. I love singing, but it's a very personal experience for me. And so it wasn't incredibly important for me to share it for a long time. It was just kind of a thing I did for me. And when Quinn and I met, we met in Los Angeles like 7 years ago. And we were friends for a long time before we started dating. And through that process, she was like, you have to start playing your music out. You know, she was very encouraging to me, and I appreciated that. And I was very stage shy. Performance was like not my area of expertise. And she grew up a performer. So I think, to your point, yes, I definitely personally feel stronger with her. She helped me in so many ways be comfortable, not just sharing my music, but being on a stage, being in front of a microphone, talking to people like you. So yeah, it's been better together for more reasons than one.
For me, it's funny because I'm going to speak more on the queer aspect of it, because I came out much later than Courtney. I come from a very, very Christian Southern family where you're like supposed to be a Southern belle kind of mentality, like you wear the proper clothes and all that stuff. And so it was like a really scary transition for me to even accept it for myself. And when the music aspect of it and the artistry side of it started to come to light, obviously we had already been dating, but I was like petrified to admit to people sometimes that we were together. And she pushed me to say like, well, screw it, we're together and that's just the way it is and that's the way it's gonna be, and I'm happy and you can't change my happiness, and I love her and she loves me and we're gonna make music together whether you like it or not. So she like helped me come out of my shell on that front, because she's been very strong with that perspective of life since the moment I've like met her, really. So I was very fortunate on that side of things, because I think if it wouldn't have been for her, I probably would still be one of those artists who are like, well, it's just not really worth like telling someone. But it is. It's important to tell people, because this is what changes people's like views. You know, we've had so many people send us comments after a show and say like, you just changed my whole life tonight. Thank you. I saw your show and my daughter it came out to me and I didn't know how to handle it. And your love is so beautiful that I see that it can be a real thing. So stuff like that is so moving and so like, I don't know.
It definitely shifts you from the perspective of feeling like, do I really want to deal with the negative repercussions that might come to be if I am honest about who I am and my sexuality and my partner, and into a more of a way of thinking like it's my responsibility. I feel now as you know, well into my maturity of coming out, to share that regardless of the repercussions, because there might be like a 15-year-old me in the audience who needs to see it and hear it. So yeah.
And, you know, and as someone who's a youth educator and advocate, I'm always looking at that, because I think of that, you know, I think of the, you know, 13, 14-year-old Courtney, Quinn, Tommy, Chris, who's sitting somewhere thinking there's nobody like me out there in that music, and I really like that music. And then they get turned on to you and they realize that it is a completely different world. The world is so big, and that they do have a place in it, and that there's people out there, there's heroes that they can follow, and they can become more connected to it. And I think that that's really important. I'm always looking at that angle. And, you know, as somebody who I grew up on like Dolly and Kenny and Johnny and Tammy and Loretta and Hank, the old, like Waylon, the old, you know, old country stars. My parents were huge into country music, but I never connected with it. I always connected with like the rock, like Pink Floyd, and that stuff that was a little bit left of center. And it wasn't until, to be honest, when I really started seeking out and listening to music by LGBT artists in country, where I was kind of like, I know now what I was missing and why I didn't connect to it, because it was so very different from me, what they were talking about. I didn't connect the same way. But when I started hearing, you know, other artists and kind of listening to it, I was like, that's the connection. Now I can hear the story differently. And I think about that when I was young. Had I have had that, it could have been very, very different for me in terms of just, I was already a music fan, but I may have gone, look, I may be a huge country fan bigger than I already am. So, but to what you were kind of saying, and I'm going to jump to Tommy for a second. Tommy, in the industry over there, because, you know, it is different, and your setup is probably different. I'm curious from a musician standpoint, from other artists, whether or not they're LGBT or not, and I'm thinking more not, to radio and industry. Have you had those moments, and, you know, in terms of reception, where it's been kind of like you have to break through the other artists, the artists aren't necessarily accepting of it, or have the artists been accepting of it and the industry hasn't, or has it been both or neither?
That's an interesting question. I think for the most part, artists are very accepting, and not only accepting, but they celebrate diversity. When it comes to the industry side of things, I don't know, I think mostly my experience so far has been positive. I have only had one song, as I say, that has had openly gay lyrics so far. So my first couple of singles, yes, I was an openly gay man, but there was no gay content in there, so to speak. So I don't know if that helped with things taking off over here. But yeah, in general, I would say it's accepting, but we just don't have too many artists getting played at like the top level who are queer in general, not just in country music over here in the UK. So I think that lack of representation does speak to something. Personally, I don't even know what that is yet, though.
And, you know, I think about your latest single that you put out, which was, to me, kind of brilliant and interesting, and probably a little scary to release a cover of, you know, George Michael and Wham's Freedom as a country artist and as a country song, because I think about, it makes sense, right? When you think about George Michael himself, to kind of like take that on, but then you think about the fans and how maybe so not country that they may be, that there's just the uproar of like, I can't believe the sacrilege that you would, you know, do Wham as country. But as far as I could see, it has been received really well.
Yeah, it really has. I think because I've been performing it live for probably about 2 years or so, I was starting to get a good gauge of how people were reacting to it. So yeah, I was really pleased with the reaction over here. Yeah, people seem to have taken to it. I think because it's not just a straightforward cover, and it is a real kind of different take on it. People have been digging it. So yeah, I was really pleased with that.
Chris, kind of the same question as I was just kind of saying to Tommy. And I know that you mentioned a little bit about this, but has it been artists that have been more supportive versus the industry, or have you seen kind of like the rockiness on both sides?
Yeah, I definitely, would like echo what Tommy said about that. Like other artists, I haven't had a single like negative encounter with. I mean, there's definitely some people, a lot of country artists, especially in town, or other songwriters in town, that I'm very much on different sides of the country spectrum than them, and so I just probably won't like associate myself with them too much. You know, with the people that are singing about guys that are singing about trucks and dirt roads and girls' butts and objectifying women and stuff, I don't tend to like write with those people, you know. So you can pretty much avoid like negative people that you would maybe have experiences with. But industry wise, like, and I haven't had any blatant like overtly like bad experiences because of like my sexuality or anything, but at the same time there have been some, whether it was like other songwriters or maybe some publishers that once it was discovered that I was gay, that they didn't necessarily say like, oh, how dare you, or, you know, like you're going to hell or anything, but like, oh, okay, and then it just kind of fizzles maybe after that, because and I think sadly I think that's maybe just like a little too much for like a publishing company or a label or something, not everybody, maybe that's a liability for that, or they view that as a liability. It's going to take the right fit with like an industry, people that want to be a part of the movement, and take on that little bit of risk that is involved. So I haven't had any like bad experiences again, but at the same time, I think there's been some maybe opportunities that if that wasn't a part of the thing, that maybe would have gone further or something. So
I always hear probably the biggest thing is when it comes to marketing, and you're talking to labels and stuff like that, is when people get a little gun shy or whatnot. They're like, I don't know what to do, and how do we kind of put things out? It's kind of like, that's your job, is to know how to do this. So if you can't quite figure it out, but I'm seeing change, and I think that I'm seeing it because I'm looking for it, right? I'm digging in to kind of find what's kind of happening out there, because I'm obviously, from this platform and just myself as a person, I'm looking to elevate those voices and hoping to see the voices being elevated. One of the places I'm kind of curious about, and I don't know how much any of you had experience with this, is festivals. With festivals, and I'm going to throw it to Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn. With festivals, have you been a part of many, and have you seen representation changing lately in there? And the reason I'm asking about festivals is that every year, maybe not this year, and this is the year of that this will just go down in history, where it's kind of like, but not that year. But every year there is the announcements. There's the Coachellas, there's the Bonnaroos, there's this, there's that, right? And you always get the crowds kind of on social media kind of pushing out, Coachella so straight, Coachella so white, that kind of thing, right? Coachella so male, even, right? And it really does kind of, for me, make me kind of question and look at it and say, and I've gone through the lists to see who I know. And I mean, obviously there's probably more people than I actually do know, because they're not out there, you don't get a stamp that says, and here's our queer artist list. But I'm from the inside, from yourselves, if you're seeing that, or if there's been a change, or has it kind of always been there, but people are just now more vocal, I guess, about themselves.
It's funny that you mentioned festivals, because this year we have planned sort of like a Southeastern festival tour, and obviously that's all been
COVID-19
canceled. So as far as representation, I don't know. I always feel like it's a chicken and egg conversation. Like, is there representation and people are just being quiet about it? Is there not representation and people aren't pursuing those opportunities because they don't see the representation, or are they not allowed in because of their sexuality? It's this really kind of complex issue that, you can feel this ceiling, but you're not really sure what the issue is. And just like, Chris and Tommy are saying, when it comes to other artists, you don't always feel the rejection there. But in the industry standard definitely feels like we're running into some roadblocks. I don't know. The festivals that we've been a part of, I would say most of the time we're the only openly LGBT folks that we know of.
Except for obviously Pride.
Right.
I mean, that's like the only.
And then maybe we've been a part of one other like super local to our area festival that is pretty rich in diversity. But I don't know. I don't see a ton of it. I just don't know why that is.
And I think maybe this even ties into the question that you asked Tommy and Chris too, but I think that it comes down to, and this is going to sound maybe so harsh, but I think it comes down to like marketability. And as our world changes with our viewers and the people that listen to the music that we, produce and put out, as that acceptance in country music and Americana and these like forms of music that have been so rigidly like set into like a certain a lifestyle, if you will, that to me is sort of what drives the marketability, because those are the people listening, those are the people who are going to tune into the radio, those are the people that these producers and these radio stations are like nervous of offending, And with the change, which is so great, I've seen such a great change over just like the past 2 years, even as far as like even pronouns being used and things like that, like Tommy was mentioning. I think it's coming to a good place. I think we're going to see a lot more representation from people who are queer, and we're going to feel more comfortable in those moments. And I think when that changes, the radio stations and all of the other industry people are just going to kind of follow suit, because I don't really think they care that much. I don't think it really comes down to them really having a problem, because most of the people that I've run into in those places or in those situations, they never really do. They're like so friendly and nice, and then it's like, but there is like this weird cap. Why? I think it's because of the viewers, really, and that kind of changes everything. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's just sort of the sense that I get.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Just from different perspectives. And you know what all three of you, four of you have said at one point in time during this conversation is, it seems like there's something, but you just don't know what it is, that there's something kind of weird there. And, you know, it's hard to put your finger on it, because it's not something where you can kind of say, you know, it's not a gender bias. You know, it's not about gender parity. It's not about racial parity or you know, representation that way. It's, you know, a strange kind of, you know, twisty, turny river, and you're not sure if there's rocks or what's going on, if there's a, you know, a waterfall coming, but, which is a weird analogy, but it's just, it does seem like you're not feeling it directly, but you know that there's an air of, there's an air of change, because things are changing differently, but it's kind of like, it's hard to figure out, you know, that ceiling, like you were saying, you know, that it's there, but it's kind of like, is there a cap? Tommy, and I don't know, and I mean, you've already kind of said that, you know, you're probably one of the only open country artists in the UK. I'm curious from your you know, experience from festivals, if you do festivals, and if you have, are you going just strictly country festivals, and what you're seeing kind of there, or are you doing like a broad range, like a festival that has all different kinds of music, and, you know, kind of what you're seeing?
Right. Well, interesting thing is, this year was going to be my first year at festivals, so I had a bunch of.
I feel like I'm like the bad guy that keeps coming in to kind of, you know, just pick at the wound of this, and it's kind of like, yeah, this year I was supposed to have, and sorry, continue.
It's exactly that. It was, yeah, I had bookings for, it was either country music festivals or pride festivals. All genre festivals over here in the UK don't really take on country artists. It hasn't reached the point where it's totally mainstream. Getting there, but not quite yet. But I think something that is interesting over here is we do kind of separate country festivals and Americana festivals and folk festivals. And whichever your closest matches, you are put into that one, and you don't really get to play the Americana ones. You don't really get to play the folk ones. You never see artists doing a slightly different circuit, if that makes sense. I think of like one of our greatest artists, Yola, who was nominated for Best New Artist at the Grammys this year. She has been firmly boxed into Americana and does not get played on country radio, does not play country music festivals, even though she is I think one of our best country music artists. So I feel like there's another layer beyond kind of just the outright queer thing, where I think a lot of queer artists that I know of do actually tend to record more traditional leaning country or Americana style country. And I don't know if maybe that is another roadblock for mainstream country success. Yeah, that's just a thought.
That is actually, that's really interesting, because, and I mean, Chris and Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, you may have a better understanding of this and perspective on it. I don't go to a lot of festivals, not just country, but in general. So I'm like, but I know that we do have folk festivals, but I don't think people are excluded from them because they may skew too much towards like a traditional country. It's up to you to apply to them, and it's as to whether or not you get accepted, and they slot you dependent, like accordingly. Chris, I don't know if you do too many festivals or not, but I mean, if you can respond to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that was so spot on too. The point as far as like genre and limitations, because of like the weird like obscurity between like Americana, folk, country makes in the States here makes things even more complicated too. But yeah, I haven't done like a ton of festivals as an artist. I did a massive one last year that was a big country festival in Kansas that I got to play in front of, like, I opened for Old Dominion, and there's like 20,000 people there. That was awesome. But from my experience though, because I've also had the opportunity, I was about to go to South by Southwest playing for a really good friend of mine who's also a queer artist, Mercy Bell, here in Nashville, and I play upright bass for her and sing background vocals and stuff. So and she's more in the folk Americana world. She's played at the Queer Roots Americana. It was part of Americana Fest the last couple of years here. So it's cool to get that perspective too and see the differences, because yeah, the festivals that I've played backing her up a lot, like just so much more of the like Yola artists like that, and Brandy Carlisle, and queerness is, from my experience, more embraced in that. And I mean, maybe because it's just, there's been more exposure to it. And going back to what y'all said, like the listeners, I feel like just kind of generally being more open-minded. But yeah, because then the festival that I played at last year was like Luke Combs, like Old Dominion, like the very much radio people that are more kind of traditional or commercial country. So it's really weird how there is kind of those limitations because of it. And then I think though, I look at examples like Casey Musgraves, who can just love her so much. I mean, she will go down, like, I think, as a huge influencer in the LGBT movement in music. Songs like Follow Your, I mean, even though she's not in the community, I remember being like, hearing Follow Your Arrow and being like, okay, there's a place for me. So, I think there's artists like her that can kind of do maybe both, because I know she does really well at the Bonnaroo Festival here, but can also play country or so I think there are some of those artists that can kind of float in between, but yeah.
And Casey Musgraves is a really great example of, I find Casey Musgraves to be one of, if not the best example of strong allyship and how to put yourself out there from an ally standpoint. I think that she's probably one of the best examples, and I think it was a surprise to folks, and it shouldn't be, because if you listen to anything that she writes about or any interview, it's not surprising that she would have a good sense of allyship behind her, because she does express that really, really well. But some people were surprised. They're like, out of country music? Really? That's where we're going to see strong allyship? It's kind of like, it's not necessarily about out of country music. It's about the fact that it's one person who really understands it and gets it and is using their platform to show other people what allyship is like. It's like,
yes, I loved her for that reason.
I'm like, dial it down, folks. It's like, but Courtney, Lynn, Quinn, in terms of, and I'm really interested from your perspective, because Chris just mentioned about that floating back and forth, and about how the Americana world probably does have a system in place, or artists and listeners in place that kind of get it more. Do you see that mixture in those festivals, not just, I mean, from a sexuality standpoint, but I'm thinking now from the umbrella of country, are people kind of interested more about it? Because I think Americana now has a very big bright light on it that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. This is going to sound kind of funny, but it's interesting because when Chris and Tommy were speaking on this, I was like, yeah, because even when you reached out to us and said, I'm going to talk about country music, I was like, well, do we fall under that? I mean, we do, because you're right. Like, Americana is so influenced by the traditional folk country sound, but it's like this box has been placed around country music so that, like, I don't necessarily think, I think we actually tried one time to apply for like a country music thing, and we didn't get accepted. And I thought to myself, well, maybe we're just too Americana. Maybe we're not country enough to fit into that box. And so I do think there's a lot to be said for that, for sure. Like, the umbrella of country doesn't really umbrella all of the roots that it once did.
Yeah, I think I can't speak for everybody else, but I feel like with our genre of music, and maybe our particular sound, I'm not sure, I feel like we have more opportunities maybe than like a traditional country artist does.
Yeah.
Because we can play, like, you know, down here in the South, we can even play at like some bluegrass festivals, folk festivals, Americana festivals. We can play at like kind of those hodgepodge festivals, or even country sometimes. And so, but when you're a country artist and you're trying to get into these different areas, I think maybe you experience more roadblocks. I'm not sure, but I just feel like from the Americana standpoint, I haven't felt overly limited in what we can apply for.
And then on the queer side of it, I feel like certainly if you're just like a traditional country artist, there are definitely more roadblocks. Because I do think that the audience has a very kind of suited position and mindset of what they're expecting from lyrics from country music. I mean, people make jokes all the time about, like, if it doesn't have a truck or a dog, or, you know, like, it's a joke, but it's kind of like that's been this whole movement for so long that now, you know, I do feel like there are some limitations there for sure, especially in the queer aspect. I do feel like in the Americana scene, we see more representation, like the Brandy Carlisles, like even taking it back to like the Indigo Girls, kind of like they, you know what I mean? Like back to that sound where it seems a little bit more open to that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I always look at country, and I use country as an umbrella term. For me, I do, because I grew up seeing these different artists and where they were influenced, right? And I remember seeing, you know, like, Eve, you can go back to yodeling if you want to, but you know what I mean? There's a ton of artists who I see that fall within that. And it's really interesting that there may be some of those boxes that are there that I normally wouldn't think would be there. And suddenly it becomes a lot more, I don't know, complicated's the word, but it is quite layered in terms of what's going on. And I'm sure for some artists, it is quite complicated because you don't get the chance to be a part of other worlds that your influence has drawn from, and you feel a kinship for, because there are these walls. That's really sad. Because I think that, you know, everybody has an opportunity to learn. And I say this even from the queer aspect, right? It's kind of like everybody has an opportunity to learn from good music and good performance, strong music and strong writing and strong performance. I don't care if you're, you know, whatever, a fan of, you know, whether it's bluegrass, whether it's traditional country, whether it's, again, torch and twang. But there's so much more, and what I'm going to get to in a second, and I think of drag and what drag and country are now partnering up with, because it's very interesting. But like, there's so much to learn because there's such a quality of writing that's happening there that I don't think people realize that these kinds of, you know, walls get put up. Going to drag for a second. So one of the and I wish they were here. I wish I could have them here, but they're a little unreachable. Maybe not 100%, but maybe I'll be able to poke at them at some point in time. So, you know, an artist like Trixie Mattel, and I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Trixie Mattel as a drag queen, but Trixie Mattel is a big drag queen, but writes country music and sometimes traditional, sometimes more Americana, and is a great songwriter. But even more so, you know, having a male in a very big wig, and, you know, big makeup and big personality and writing incredible country music is all of a sudden, probably for a lot of artists, forget about the sexuality at some point. They're trying to get through that, but then all of a sudden you're presented with almost an image of everything that country music probably wasn't ever stood for.
Right.
My question to all of you, and I'll throw it to Tommy first because he's over in the UK, because I'm really curious, is do you see that kind of combination happening with drag and country music the way that I'm now starting to see from some of these artists in the United States?
Oh, wow. Not so much over here, I'll be honest. I think the UK's experience of drag is RuPaul's Drag Race, and that is kind of it. So we are familiar with Trixie Mattel, and I know she tours over here and has a great following, but I can't say I've seen any examples of that whatsoever. As I say, barely any LGBTQ plus representation, full stop. So I think drag country is probably the next step along from that over here.
Chris, how about you from your perspective? Drag and country, anything happening?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that come to mind in Nashville. And we have the LGBT scene isn't huge here, but there's like one nice like gay club that has fantastic drag shows called Play. I don't know, like Brooklyn Heights just came out of Nashville, out of there and stuff. But anyway, so a couple things. Actually, back to Casey Musgraves. I think I don't know if this had any actual like influence on that, but it felt like a huge moment for sure. But I got to go to Casey Musgraves. It was for her pageant material album. She did her album listening party for like the industry at Play, and had drag queens perform her songs as the listening thing. So like a friend of mine dressed up and like did biscuits and had like a plate of biscuits and stuff. And so there's all these industry people in this room, like most of who have probably never seen drag before. And it was just a brilliant idea, and also like, but a way of Casey kind of putting her stamp on stuff. But another thing, the only really like exposure I can think of other than like Trixie Mattel and stuff is they do a thing here called like the Big Old Gay Opry, I think is what it's called. But and they do that I think it's a month, or used to be, again before Corona. But I think it's a monthly show that they do here. That there's this Margot Twitty in the Twat Biscuits or something like that. Something about Twat Biscuits. I can't remember their name exactly, but they are this like group of people that do this like monthly gay Opry that it's very classic, traditional. I mean, like the most country stuff, and they do these live shows, and it's very, comedy heavy, and that is also putting it in front of, I think they do that at the City Winery here, and it's again like in front of crowds that would not normally be exposed to that. So it is cool, things like that. You know, granted, like then you also have to wonder, okay, if like LGBT representation in country is only accepted if it's comedy, then at some point it's gonna have to be more representation than that. But it's probably doing more. I think it's good, just the exposure that it's creating and stuff. So.
And Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, how about from your angle? And I'm just super curious about this topic.
I don't really have, I haven't really seen, or I don't really have like a strong opinion on this, except for like when I've seen an awesome, you know, drag queen represent Dolly or something. Like that's like the only.
It's funny that you say that, because that was like one of the first things that came to mind. I think in our specific community, I've never seen any representation firsthand of you know, drag and country. However, I have seen good representation of good allyship. And Dolly was someone that came to mind because we just finished listening to Dolly Parton's America, which is an incredible podcast. And if you haven't listened to it, recommend. But that's one of the things that we're talking about, is how Dolly Parton has been able to reach such a large audience and large demographic, everything from your traditional, you know, Southern conservative country music fan all the way to like
your best drag queen,
full drag at the concerts, and how when you go to her concerts, you just see this like huge gamut of people and diversity. And so I think that is a good first step. And I think, you know, we're unfortunately, you know, struggling just to find representation as far as like sexuality, sometimes for like the trans community and for those who, you know, the drag community or whatever, that can kind of be the next step. And I hate to say that, but it just feels like the pattern, like we have to get, for some reason the public has to like accept one step at a time, and that for whatever reason drag and those who are trans come second. And I hate that, but that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah, and you know what, to echo that, because one of the things that I haven't seen much of it all is trans artists from a country standpoint, from maybe a singer-songwriter standpoint, yes, but not from being able to hear them and saying, yeah, this is a country artist, or this is an Americana artist, or a bluegrass artist. Sure. I think that you're not seeing that just yet, right. And I think that we're talking about comfort levels just from a sexuality standpoint. That's a completely different world of them needing to feel like they're in a safe space, that they're in a comfortable space and in an accepting space. And they probably do not have that just yet.
Yeah. Right.
Looking to the future and, you know, thinking about what you would like to see more in your own worlds, you know, because I think that even though you know, 3 of you are in the United States and 1's in the UK, you are in different places and you are in different, you know, subgenres of, you know, the country umbrella. But from each of you, I just kind of like to ask, like, you know, what would you like to see the next step be for yourselves? And that can be also from a gender perspective as well, please. So Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, you're on my screen right now, so I'll throw to you.
Oh gosh, so many things. Well, first and foremost, I'd love for this virus to just disappear. You know, like, can we see our fans again? I miss people. I'm like a huge extrovert, and I like love being able to do live performance with my wife, and it's been just so, I hate that we can't perform right now.
Yeah.
Obviously there, like you said, it opens up many boxes, and there's different avenues that we're even looking into, and that's all awesome, and I think we're all going to learn and grow from this year, but I'm ready to get back out there. Mm-hmm. So that's first and foremost for me. But also I'm excited for the change that I'm seeing in the mainstream community with acceptance of, like, I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed and that I'm like excited about is people accepting the pronouns. Because it seems like such a little thing, but even as someone who used to perform cover shows solo, I would always think to myself, okay, this song was written by a guy and he says she, I need to switch it to he. Right? Like, it's silly. It seems silly, but it's, to me, it's such an impactful thing. And I think it's so beautiful that we're seeing, and it's happening obviously more in like the pop culture world, which that sort of unfortunately leads the pact in open-mindedness, I think, in a lot of ways anyway. So once that kind of starts to transition, I think other groups feel a little bit more comfortable doing it. So for me, I'm excited to see those things come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Yeah,
changes.
I would just agree with everything you just said, really.
Yeah.
I think like the coronavirus has made it difficult to plan because we don't know what the world is going to look like in a year or even 2 years. And so, you know, everything that we had planned prior to April is now kind of in this transition mode. So goal wise, it's a little bit difficult, but definitely like in the short term, just performing in front of a live audience would feel so good right now. And then, yeah, I think just continuing to see the change that's already happening. And I know that there are a lot of hurdles and there's a lot of roadblocks, and we've had more than enough negative experiences to talk about, but we've also had so many positive experiences. And I think sometimes, you know, your attention kind of guides your perspective, and if we can focus our attention on what's positive and continue to build upon that, then hopefully it'll continue and broaden. So,
Tommy, how about you? What would you like to see happen next? Like, what would you like to, you know, what would put a big smile on your face?
I think to kind of echo what the girls have just said then, I definitely want to keep releasing songs that have openly gay pronouns in, and I would love to see more artists do that and for it to become a normalized sort of thing, because it is going to take, I think, a lot of artists releasing a lot of songs before people start to accept it. I think just having one, like I've had over here on the radio, have one song, do it on the radio, but then not follow up with another one wouldn't really do anything. So I think I really want to continue that myself, and have other artists do that, hopefully in the UK if they feel more comfortable doing that. And I would love to get to a place where I can go into an interview with, like, say a country music publication or something, and not have the number one question be, what's it like to be a gay artist in country music? Yeah. Because like, it's awesome, like people are asking about it and I get to talk about it. But at the same time, you're like, okay, cool. Do you not want to ask me about the great musicians I'm working with, or like this cool thing that's going on over here, which I feel like everyone else it's just what they get asked. So it'd be awesome in a few years' time, you know, if we were to just go into an interview and almost have sexuality not be part of the conversation. Like that would be amazing, but I do think it's a little way down the line.
Yeah.
And then there's people like me who do an entire thing around it.
But it's needed. It's needed.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, hopefully we get to that point because of things like this. That's the fingers crossed. Mr. Hausman, what would you like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that things, you know, like things like this are absolutely necessary until we get to that place. And then, yeah, you know, but I think right now is, I mean, I agree so much with so much of what Tommy and Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn said. And just like right now is such a crazy time in the world. I mean, you know, from my perspective, the States is just insane right now, but I find like inklings, little glimpses of hope that like things are like actually changing right in front of our eyes and on the ground right in front of us, in all kinds of ways, you know. But I think just acceptance in general is going to skyrocket from this, I hope. I mean, there'll also be a lot of divisiveness and divide, but things like in arts and music and, you know, has always been extremely diverse, whether that be sexuality-wise, race-wise, culture, country, you know. So getting to a place where that is, you know, celebrated, and people aren't being, like certain voices aren't being muted because of parts of their identity. And yeah, eventually where like, you know, sexuality or, you know, stuff like that doesn't even come into the question. But until that happens, and personally, like, you know, I have kind of a goals little board thing. I mean, some of them are like, you know, pay down some debt and stuff. Yeah. But one of them, try to save money, like work out more. But what, like, I have I really, like I said earlier, I see this kind of opportunity. And one of the goals that I have written down is to be the first like openly LGBT artist played on a major country station. That's like, and so I'm just trying to like manifest that. That's obviously quite a ways down the road, and I haven't right now, so far the songs I've put out, I just haven't used pronouns at all. I definitely have songs that I want to put out, and I'm kind of trying to plan that strategically, and I don't know, but yeah, and then eventually also to be able to put out songs and comfortably use the correct pronouns that I wrote the songs about. And but yeah, so I think with things like this, and people like us just keeping on is going to make that stuff happen. So
yeah,
awesome. Folks, this has been fantastic. This is the first, which I hope of many, of these kinds of videos and discussions to have. And what I would say, Chris, too, back to you for a second, is that you've been really vocal, especially on Twitter, in support of what's been happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that is part of that crossover of diversity and things that we, the communities are very close together, and always have been. But I do recognize that you have been somebody who has been quite vocal out there at times, which is great to see. I think that doing things like this help move things forward, recognizing that as artists, you're out there first and foremost, and that you are, and I would say for all three of you, keep saying three. There's four of you, but I mean as the acts.
that's fine.
but all of you are making, in my opinion, who am I? But doesn't matter. In my opinion, all of you are making world-class music that is just as good as anything that's being put out on the radio. It's just that I don't think that our funnel or our hose of whatever's coming through for music, there is a 1 or even a 0.001% that seems to kind of get through, and the other 99.9% are trying to find ways to even just break into music, like just to be heard, regardless of sexuality and that. But I would say that, in some mindsets, there is a bit of a stigma when anybody hears that it's a member of the community, LGBT community, that it's going to be, I don't know what type of music that they think it's going to be, but it's going to be almost, there's a stigma that it's going to be not legitimate almost sometimes. And then sometimes you have to fake people into it, where it's kind of like they're here. It's like, who is this? And then you can kind of like come in. Well, let me tell you about them, because I do that all the time. Simply because I think when, and I understand from an artist's perspective, sometimes not wanting to lead with the sexuality because they have seen and they know that stigma exists, that it's kind of like the music is first, and the music should always be at the forefront because it's what it is. It's the most important part. But then the perspective of that person from their sexualities is something, again, that I say that, we have to always keep that in mind, that there is a story there that is unlike the standard story because it's coming from a different place. Final thoughts from anyone. If anybody has anything final to say, I would love to hear from you. Tommy, anything final?
Oh, wow. I don't really have any final thoughts, but I want to thank you just so much for putting this together, Kenny. It's been so nice to meet Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, and Chris as well. Just so great to hear, as you say, different perspectives. It really is interesting being over here in the UK. Also having a lot of close ties with people in Nashville, and having been over there and experienced the scene over there. It is just really interesting to see how you guys are getting on kind of with your own fight as well. It's really, really cool to see.
Mm-hmm. Chris, any last remarks from you?
Well, and Tommy and Courtney and Quinn, when y'all do come, if you ever do come to Nashville, and Kenny, look me up. when, obvious that it's a ways down the road. But,
Yeah.
no, Kenny, thanks so much for putting this together. I guess just sort of like announcement thing on my front as far as music going forward. Like should be getting like a mix back on the next single that I'm shooting to put out mid-September-ish. So I'm recording a cover of an old Eddie Arnold song. It was a cowboy like Western song called Cattle Call. And I totally rearranged it, and it's like it's pretty country pop even, and I whistle instead of doing the yodel part, so I don't know. So that'll be be on the lookout for that in like a month or so.
Cool.
Tommy, did you have anything to plug now?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my first EP is going to be coming out next month, probably around the same time as yours, Chris. So yeah, my next single is going to be called "Kiss Me Cowboy," and it's kind of a story about young love. Again, has openly gay lyrics in it. So yeah, fingers crossed that'll do okay.
Cool. Good for you. That's awesome.
Courtney, Lynn, and Quinn, final thoughts. Anything that's coming up for releases, let us know.
I would like to just thank you for having us today on this. I think this is a really cool thing that you're doing. I look forward to seeing more of what you're trying to do with this and the representation that you're bringing to so many people. That is one cool thing about the virtual world right now. Even with Corona, we can all at least still endorse each other, support each other, love each other through all this. So thank you for having us today. It was so nice to meet you, Chris and Tommy. I could listen to Tommy talk all day, so it's like really cool to be a part of this group, and I'm excited to hear the upcoming stuff that you guys have. If you ever get bored on a Thursday night, our Eastern time at 7:30, we do a live stream just for fun. But then
we released our album back in January, so we're in the throes of writing for the next one right now. So yeah, echo everything you said. We appreciate being here. It was lovely talking to all of you, and we could probably do this for like 4 more hours. So I know it's a complicated, layered conversation, but it was good to kind of delve into it a little bit.
It's the starting point, right? So I want to thank all of you for taking a chance on who is that guy anyway. Like, it's interesting what you just said about the virtual world, because normally we wouldn't get these opportunities but we've been forced into it. And I think that because we've been forced into it because of COVID and Corona, and it really does bring out some really cool ideas like this, and it give some folks who don't necessarily normally get a chance to talk about it an avenue and an opportunity to just dive into that stuff a little bit more. And you're right, we could go on for 4 days and months, but then I would feel like I was holding you hostage, so I won't do that. All right, I'm going to return you to your lives from which I rudely took you from. I hope everyone is doing well in your home, and you're safe and doing well and all of that, and we're going to talk some more at some point in time.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.